Hi, hi Rituparno this side. I hope you guys can see me and hear me.
I can see you fine.
Right.
I can hear you fine.
Right. Hi.
Welcome on board.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Let's have a good time discussing the talks. I understand that I think in half an hour we'll have a bilateral, informal meeting between the Secretary of State and just a minute. Right. Sorry. So, do we have all our panelists on board? I can see.
No, so we still, I think we are waiting for Mr. Nitin Seth to come in.
Right.
Oh, he's come in already. Okay, he'll join. So,
Right.
if you don't mind, can we start the session?
Right. So we have Lieutenant General Hasnain and Mr. Blair and Bhargava, Mr. Bhargava, Commander Bhargava, all are in.
Everyone is in.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So let's.
If I can just start the session.
Yes, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of SIDM, let me formally welcome on board our esteemed guests. While I leave the formal introductions to Mr. Rituparna Bhuiya for taking forward this discussion, let me welcome on board Lieutenant General Ata Hasnain, Syed Ata Hasnain, who is the Chancellor, Central University in Kashmir, and a member of the NDMA, a prolific writer and a speaker on all national and international forums. We have Mr. William Blair, the Chief Executive of Lockheed Martin India, Mr. Nitin Seth, the Chief Operations Officer, Ashok Leyland, and Commodore Mukesh Bhargav, the member of board L&T Defense and chairman of the SIDM committee, the Maritime Systems Committee. So, for SIDM, US has been an extremely important country for international engagements, and to foster this, SIDM hosted quite a number of interactions since 1919. We were raised actually in 2017. Since then, we've had a number of interactions, like in 2019 February in Aero India, we had an interaction of the Indian industry with Mr. Alan Schaffer, the Deputy Undersecretary Acquisition and Sustainment in the United States government. Then on 21st October 2019, we had the US-India Defense Industry Forum under the DTTI in partnership with the USIBC. The US-India Defense Ties Conference was held on 18th and 19th of December 2019 in partnership with the US Consulate General in Hyderabad and the Business Council for International Understanding, the BCIU. And finally, very recently, the SIDM USIBC webinar on export control and ST1 was held on the 8th and 11th of 8th to 10th of July. A 3-day session, and where we had this was in the webinar format, as we all know. So with this, let me hand over the proceedings to Mr. Rituparna Bhuiya, who will moderate and take forward this discussion today. And I'm sure we look forward to a very interesting and an interactive session. We will have a question answer session at the end of this discussion. Thank you very much. Over to you, Mr. Rituparna.
Thank you so much. From the Kickstarter proposals in 1991 to the third round of 2+2 talks that is scheduled tomorrow, the India-US relationship has actually seen a phase shift. In between, we have seen some very important pacts that were signed between both these countries with, for example, DTTI in 2012, COMCASA in 2018, DSOMIA in 2002, the Industrial Security Annex that was again signed, last year, and then of course the STA1 status that was given to India. Now, at the core of the latest 2+2 meeting will be the two C's, that is COVID and China. So on one hand, we have countries across the world fighting tooth and nail to limit the casualties carried out, caused because of the pandemic. And on the other hand, we have two nuclear-powered nations on the verge of crossing swords in the cold deserts of Ladakh. Now, in this backdrop, what will be the way forward for US-India defense ties? What can be done by these two democracies to tackle the current challenges that have emerged? And of course, how can both these countries further upgrade their relationship, which has been built upon? Good evening and welcome to this panel discussion. I'm Rituparna Bhuya. I'm the Chief of Bureau at CNBC TV 18 Delhi. And joining me today, as was explained earlier, is a stellar panel, starting with whom all of us know as the scholar warrior, Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain, who's a former GOC commanding general officer commanding of Srinagar-based 15 Corps. He's a chancellor of Central University of Kashmir, member of NDMA, and also he has around 40 years of both operational and field experience, and that is backed up by by academic degrees from institutions like King's College and the Royal College of Defence Studies. We also have William Blair, who's the Vice President and Chief Executive of Lockheed Martin India, and he basically leads the company's strategy in the Indian market. We have Nitin Seth, who's the CEO of Ashok Leyland, and of course we have Commodore Mukesh Bhargava, who's the executive director and member of board of L&T. In fact, Mr. Bhargava helped design India's first nuclear submarine. Now, we roughly have around 45 minutes for this panel discussion, and after that, we'll have a short round of questions. So keep those questions coming in the chat board that you see next to the app. My request to the fellow panelists is to limit their responses to just about 2 minutes, so that we can squeeze in as much points as we can in this limited period of time. Let's start this discussion by first getting a strategic and security perspective of the talks that will happen tomorrow from Lieutenant General Hasnain. Sir, if you could give us your take on the summit that is going to take place tomorrow. Over to you, Lieutenant General Hasnain.
Thank you, Mr. Rituparna. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure interacting with you. As to your question, and let me try and be brief. What's different this time? I attended the 2+2 deliberations on the sidelines in 2018 in Delhi, and it was a pleasure actually taking part in a couple of sessions which were of the main talks, and we discussed a tremendous amount at that time. From then till now, I think what Indo-US relations has always looked for is a transformational character. Somehow, from 1991, when the kicks, if you remember the famous kick later, proposals had been made for commencement of Indo-US military ties, the famous kick later proposals. Since then till 2020, somehow our relationship has been strong, progressive, but devoid of something which is called transformation. For the first time, you're finding the geopolitical environment of the world pushing this relationship between India and the United States to what I consider a transformational level. For long, we have seen that the United States has considered China as a potential adversary. After all, it's the United States which brought China out of oblivion from 1969, brought them overboard, brought them into the international economy, into international politics and things like that. But at the end of the day, today it considers itself a virtual adversary. And to counter China, the United States has always looked at the potential of, pivoting to Asia, which is what Mr. Obama used to say in those days. And it somehow never could do it because of Afghanistan, the pull of Afghanistan, the pull of the Middle East, the pull of Iraq, and things like that. For the first time, we find that this pull is no longer there. And therefore, the United States is actually moving lock, stock, and barrel in seriousness and focus towards the Indo-Pacific, into the Pacific area particularly, is seeking a partner, a strong partner in the Indian Ocean region, which is called in the larger canvas called the Indo-Pacific. And therefore, with events happening on the Ladakh frontier, with the events happening due to COVID, the emergence of what is being spoken about as a potential new world order, we are looking at actually the start of a transformational relationship.
Well said, Lieutenant Hassan. As you said, geopolitical events actually pushing these two democracies to a transformational relationship. And now, sir, if we go back and see the kind of agreements that have been signed, for example, you have the LEMOA, COMCASA, and perhaps we'll have the BECA tomorrow, right? The thrust of these, of these agreements is to basically get interoperability of the forces. So, what does this mean for the Indo-Pacific, region? If you can explain that to us, getting the forces to have interoperability amongst themselves.
Right. If you go back to 2005, I would say, in fact, the specific date is the 18th of July. The 18th of July, a path-breaking speech by Mr. Pranab Mukherjee in Washington at that time, laying out what was his perception of what the Indo-US relations would all be about. And that is the first time when an aspect of interest was shown by the United States and India together to actually take this relationship forward and actually start looking at the military aspects of cooperation. That's also around the time when, for the first time, the nuclear deal started, finding traction between India and the United States. But it took a long time before many of these, like LEMOA, like BECA is now coming in after almost 15 years. It has taken a fair amount of time. And of course, it had to take that amount of time. It has to, first of all, a trust had to be established. After all, India and the United States were on different sides. They were on opposite sides during the Cold War, and that no one can deny. So therefore, one had to establish a certain degree of trust. And that trust seems to have got cemented much more in this, particularly in the last 6 months to 1 year, particularly in this post-COVID, in the COVID period that we are looking at. So interoperability today, we're looking at, no doubt, the aspects of a lot of technology which is needed to be brought into the subcontinent, into the Indian domain, the absorption of that technology, and then the capability to be able to operate with that technology. The whole aspect of communications, the whole aspect of data, the data technologies which need to be managed completely. The entire aspects of drone management, which is something which has so far not even stepped into India. We don't even have armed drones so far in India. The philosophy of drones has to be completely learned by India, in fact. So there are many, many such issues which between the United States and India, as a result of these so many technical agreements which have taken place, which are likely to take place in the future, no doubt they are going to add to the interoperability. But I would caution that it is going to take a fair amount of time, a fair amount of focus before we can actually achieve that.
Right. Actually, I'm going to raise some of these issues which you mentioned, including the, a very interesting point on drones that you have raised. In the run-up to these talks, we saw both the secretaries, Secretary Pompeo and Defense Secretary Esper, make very critical comments on China in the run-up to the talks. In fact, Secretary Esper termed India as the most consequential partner for the United States in the Indo-Pacific region in this century. Now, when they sit with their counterparts tomorrow in Raisina Hill, what options could they discuss on countering the Chinese actions that we have seen so far, not only in the Himalayan region, but also in the Indo-Pacific? What are the perhaps items they could both the countries could discuss on countering China, according to you?
Absolutely, very good question. And let me make it very clear at the outset. Let no one perceive this, that India wants the US to come and fight for it in Ladakh. No, India is very capable of looking after its border. It's looking after its complete border, whether it be Ladakh, whether it be Sikkim, whether it be Arunachal Pradesh, India can fight its battles. What it is looking for is the larger canvas. And the larger canvas is all about the Indian Ocean region, the maritime zone particularly, and the Pacific. And the United States recognizes India's geostrategic location and understands India's potential to act as a major ally or a major partner, strategic partner, to counter China. Now, the aspect is not about war fighting. I would say it's much more about deterrence, much more about capability build-up to project to China that China may be alone, it is alone and isolated, but the world is coming together. And important nations such as the United States, India, Japan, Australia are all coming together because they don't agree with the expansionist philosophy which China is following at the moment. These are the aspects which will have to be put on the table, discussed, but particularly on the specific aspects of cooperation. There is no doubt about it that becoming a more effective member of the Quad, for example. Now, Quad is a progressive partnership. It's not looking at a war-fighting capability, or some people are describing it as a NATO of the East. It's nothing of the sort at the moment. It is at the moment progressing. We are getting together. We are developing more trust in each other, developing a greater partnership with each other. The fact that Australia has just entered into it for the first time, Australia is going to take part in Exercise Malabar. All this, the past has to be forgotten about Australia's various shenanigans with India, 1998, if you remember, 2008, subsequently. All these things have to be forgotten if a proper strategic partnership has to emerge. India and America, I think the 2+2 talks, the greatest thing which happens is the establishment of that trust and the projection of overall capability on the part of India that it can be countered. At the same time, the United States coming forward, for example, this year, the biggest step the United States has actually taken is that 10 days before the elections in the US, you're finding the Secretary of State and the Defense Secretary of the United States actually not talking through the virtual mode, but physically traveling to New Delhi and actually getting together with their two partners, with their two counterparts. But this is an amazing development actually, and actually projects to the world, not only to the world, to China in specific, that perhaps they need to take the Indo-US emerging strategic relationship much more seriously.
Right. Now let's get in our panelists from the defense industry now. And Lieutenant General Hasnain, you made a very interesting point regarding the timing of this summit. In fact, that is one question which many of us in the media actually saw being raised in different forums. And I would want William to come in at this point of time. William, as Lieutenant General Hasnain said, by November 3, US would have voted for a new administration. If there is a different administration that gets voted in, will the takeaways from this summit be taken forward in the same spirit? William, what is the sense that US companies are getting as far as taking forward the takeaways from this edition of 2+2?
Sure, actually, and I represent Lockheed Martin here in India. Previously, I've been working in and out of India over the last few decades, and I will say, just from experience as an OEM working in India, we've always enjoyed a very strong and supportive bipartisan support. So regardless of who is in, whoever is in office, both at the executive branch as well as in the congressional side, I think history has shown that we've got very strong bipartisan support, and that dates back now for several decades. I think what's even more important, and Lieutenant General spoke to it, is just moving towards this transformational relationship. It didn't happen just overnight, right? I mean, if you look at the agreements that have been put in place over the last decade, that establishes a tremendous foundation. I was working for another company here in 2010 to 2012. It was very difficult because we didn't have the foundational relationships in at that time. There are so many things we could have been doing as companies in terms of delivering capability to meet key capability gaps. But now with the foundational agreements, the BECA coming together, the ISA that was signed last year allows us to exchange ultimately classified information with Indian partners, whether they're on the defense public sector units or in the private sector. And so we've now created, basically a fabric of relationships that I think brings a tremendous amount of resilience, and it's less dependent on the changes that might happen administration to administration. And then one other comment I will say is now, at least I can speak for Lockheed Martin, but there's other companies too that have established very robust joint ventures with Indian companies, and those were built on very strong business cases, and they've been sustainable, they've grown, they've diversified. And so, again, that's, I think part of the fabric. Think of a composite, how strong a composite is. I think we have a very composite relationship that's built through the foundational agreements, as well as the established operational capability, say with C-130Js, and we're producing empennages for the global requirement with 85% indigenization. Again, that didn't happen overnight. That's been an effort the teams have worked over a decade. So I think we're in a great position to take it forward in this next decade.
Right. Okay. Now let's get some comments from our Indian companies, and I would want Commodore Bhargava to join in now. If you can start by telling us how does the Indian defense industry see the latest round of 2+2 talks?
Thank you, Rituparna. Very delighted to be on this panel with dignitaries like General Asnan, my good friend Bill Blair, and of course Nathan Seth. As far as the Indian industry is concerned, we have been interacting at the USIBC and the USISPF and the various levels with the US industries for more than a decade plus now. And as Bill very rightly mentioned, it has led to a number of joint ventures and cooperations that have been set up. What we see, the 2+2 is actually, General Asnan very rightly mentioned that this is a transformational relationship, because it is not very easy for two top secretaries from the government of the US administration move out just 10 days before the actual elections are going to be happening. That goes to show the significance and the importance of this 2+2. And this happening just 2 months after the last meeting that was happened on the DTTI in India, followed by the follow-up actions that are happening with the standard operating procedure for the DTTI being formulated, and already the groups, the working groups, joint working groups getting formed. So we see from the industry that this 2+2 meeting which is there is going to be absolutely role changing. We are very confident that in addition to the LIMOA and the COMCASA, the BICA, which is also being hanging fire for almost last decade plus. I've personally been monitoring BICA. It has been there on the table, but not getting signed. And now with BICA getting signed, especially for the geospatial communication, it would open up huge opportunities for collaboration. Let's not forget, we have just this month beginning, the first of this month itself, we had the DAP 2020 getting announced, in addition to the DPEPP also getting announced, which is for the export promotion. So with the Indian government making these two transformational documents released in this month itself, and we have a 2+2 happening even before the month gets over, it only goes to show that this is going to be really, I would say, a watershed event for the Indian industries to be cooperating with the US industries. We have seen there are a number of partnerships, as Bill mentioned, but they've all been at the level of a lot of manufacturing getting done over here. What Indian industry is really looking for is, we have been wanting US industries which have the best technology to be partnering with the Indian industry for co-development and co-production. And this is something which Indian industry has been aspirational. We have not had the joint ventures and the collaborations taking up this particular aspect, which is the aspiration for the Indian industry. So with the DPEPP getting signed, getting released, which is defense promotion for export, defense policy for export promotion, I think the time has now come that India and US companies should be developing product not just for the India and the US defense forces, but also looking for export promotion of those products into the third countries where US companies themselves may not be able to sell their product because of their prohibitive cost. The Indian industry being the innovation champions and being the pioneers in some of the technologies, especially into the lean manufacturing and the labor arbitrage that we bring to the table, can really make products which can be adding value, and I'm not mixing my word, adding value to the US products, not just for Indian defense forces, but also for the US defense forces. But the cost competitiveness for those products would really open up a huge market for the Southeast Asia, for the Middle East, and for maybe some of the CIS countries where we can take those products from the Indian industry side. And this is a huge opportunity. And I see this 2+2 as really opening up the floodgates for the Indian industries to collaborate with the US companies if we walk the talk on what is stated in the policy of the DTTI and in the policy of the major defense partner MDP that has been announced for their STA1 status being given to India opens up the high tech field, and the DAP adding cyber and the ICT as part of its procurement. I think this opens up the cyber, ICT, and space would be the areas that I would identify to be added as part of the DTTI collaboration for looking at opportunities where Indian and US companies can not only work together for the two countries, but also take it for the third countries, as I just mentioned.
Commander Bhargava, actually, I'll come back to DTTI and some issues related to DTTI shortly. But before that, I would want to get Mr. Seth in the conversation. As defense procurements increase from US, we have seen Indian companies getting plugged into their global supply chains. What is the next phase in B2B relationships between India and between India and US in the defense sector that you foresee? If you can get your perspective on this.
No, I think, thank you very much, Vipin, and my colleagues on the panel. I think you just picked it up. One of the biggest issue we all face is about when you say winning a B2B relationship is to going to say, as we want to do Atmanirbhar and doing joint in India, the co-production comes very handy, and supply chain, which India is very good at, and in a parallel to a lot of industries which India thrives at, especially the, let's say, cars and trucks, the supply chain, if India with the Atmanirbhar as one of the theme forward, we can help to do a lot of co-production in India. This will do two things. One, reduces the cost of import, and second thing, it brings technology back into the country, which we can localize, indigenize, and also re-export from India to the country, which even Mukesh spoke about. So I think the B2B relationship, while it is going the offset obligations, the co-production and the localization of the technology towards the Indian suitable, and subsequently the maintenance becomes very critical. So I think going forward, we spoke about DTTI and also about co-production, and then using India as a base, as a two things we should look into 2+2 relationship. How can we do it faster? And I think we have the talent in the country, the kind of engineering colleges, the kind of the local, I'll say talent is available. It will be very helpful for Indian industry to do it. And for us, for Indian government, it will be also reduction of foreign exchange outflow. So I think the relationship should go to the next level. I know there may be a lot of IPR issues, but I'm sure the US companies should find India as a very, very, very reliable and enable partner to share technology with, and this can help both the things well together and strengthen the relationship further.
Right. Okay. Now let's talk about DTTI. this agreement was signed in 2012. The idea was to basically move away from a buyer-seller relationship, go into co-production, and as our co-panelists said, how co-production and co-development is the way forward. But there are issues, on one hand, we saw issues related to export control from the US side, from the Indian side. There were some issues related to budgetary constraints. Then, of course, there are issues related to licensing, and then, of course, we see companies unsure of technology transfer till now. How do you see this TTTI framework now being taken forward, given the fact that the foundational agreements are almost in place? From the Indian side as well, we have done policy interventions. Mr. Bhargav and Commodore Bhargav and William, if you can, give us specifics on how the DTTI can be taken forward to achieve this goal of having co-development and co-production of weapon platforms.
Ritu, shall I start first?
Yes, please. Okay.
Thanks for this question. And I think this is a very, very significant question since, as you mentioned, in 2012, the DTTI was signed. And the agreement, I remember Secretary Ashton Carter, when he was here in 2013-14, I made a presentation to him. And the issues that were facing the B2B cooperation between India and US. And he wanted a copy of that presentation because he said, this is my job to see that we iron out all those differences. Well, 8 years have passed, but we still don't have a single DTTI project which has taken off the ground. And this is something that I would like to flag at this point of time. We were told that it is those foundational agreements, non-signing of the foundational agreement was one of the reasons for this not moving forward. Now that we have brushed aside both LIMOA and COMCASA, and hopefully today or maybe tomorrow we'll have the BICA also signed. So that part has been taken care of. Then what are the other roadblocks in moving DTTI forward? I personally feel that the DTTI should have projects which, firstly, what is the DTTI charter? Charter is to enhance Indo-US defense cooperation, meet Indian and US MOD requirements, support development of technology competency, and make it as a transformational intent and attain it within the time and the cost, which is the constraint for both the MODs. This is the basic framework of DTTI. But the projects that were proposed as the first three, as were called as, I forgot the name.
The Pathfinder projects?
Yeah, Pathfinder projects which were identified were projects which US government as well as the US industry was comfortable to part with. Not what Indian industry or the Indian government really needed. And that's where I mentioned that co-development, co-production, or now that we have the TPCR and the LTIPP, that long-term integrated perspective plan and the technical capability build-up plan also shared with the industry, Indian MOD has now bared their next 15 years perspective plan. DTTI should take up projects which are identified by the Indian and US companies to collaborate together to take up these future challenges and look at how partnership can be formed for taking this forward. Not that US government says these four would be the Pathfinder project to start DTTI.
So what could be those projects? What could be those projects? As you said, there's a requirement from the Indian side as well on this project, so that there could be joint collaboration and development. So, William, according to you, will the US companies be comfortable in parting with technology, given the fact that the foundational agreements are now in place, and can Indian side now tell their compatriots in US that, see, these are the particular sectors where we need interventions, so why not collaborate on joint development and co-development on these particular set of projects? Why not review the Pathfinder projects and get in new projects? Can that happen, William?
Yeah, I think it can. As my colleague Mukesh spoke to, I was there also back in 2011. when DTTI was first put in place. I was with another company, now with Lockheed Martin. So I've seen it from many different dimensions. I will say, from personal experience, we teed up some very good projects with real transfer of technology in the earlier days. One that comes to mind as an example is Javelin anti-tank guided missile. It's a 50-50 joint venture between Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. It's a fire and forget anti-tank guided missile that can go for over 3 kilometers or more. And, that was an opportunity for transfer of technology, work with Bharat Dynamics Limited. We still have an MOU with them, and to really advance the capability of an anti-tank guided missile. And when you think about an ATGM, there are many available, right? There's competing companies from other countries. There's also those that are in development by DRDO. It wasn't necessarily seen as maybe strategic, but now where we sit today with the issue with the India-China border, you'd like to have multiple arrows in the quiver. But the point was it included TOT, it included co-development. And my colleague from Ashok Leyland, it included opportunities to integrate it to indigenous platforms. And so those opportunities remain. But that's a project that, has a good 7, 8, 9 years of being on offer. The other dimension is, and I know it's come up in reviews, it's back to what I said earlier, there needs to be a business case. It seems at times there was a perception that we were just seeking to bypass the defense procurement procedure and somehow sneak a project through DTTI. That really wasn't the case. What we were actually, I remember Ash Carter at the time, Deputy Secretary Ash Carter, the key point he mentioned was removing friction from the system. How do we remove friction from the system, streamline the processes, accelerate the licensing? And we do that on some strategic projects that we both mutually agree. We do it at the government to government level, and then industry comes underneath as an underpinning. I truly believe that there are still a number of projects that are in the pipeline. I can't speak to the details, but I know several myself that you could easily see moving forward. They would bring strategic capability, they would meet an urgent need, and they would, likely have a good business case that comes underneath it and translate ultimately to self-reliant India, because I think those projects translate to not just co-development, co-production, but meeting what some of my other colleagues on the panel said, meet India's requirement, but also then contribute to the very big export challenge we have in 2025.
Right. I want my co-panelists to hold that thought when William said that there are actually projects that can be taken forward. But I want to bring in Lieutenant General Atta Hasnain again. Now I understand that he has a hard stop at 7:20. So I wanted to get him on a point which is a bit different from what we were discussing. In November, sir, we are going to see the high-profile Malabar exercise between the Quad alliance. What more can we expect from the Quad going forward? As you said, it's about building trust. But now that we have all the mechanisms in place, how do you see the Quad taking forward this alliance, and do you foresee a Quad vice versus the Iron Brother scenario in this region in the foreseeable future?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. And 7:20, I have to move out actually to your channel only to speak on issues concerning Ladakh. But let me come back to the question specifically. As far as the Quad is concerned, one has been watching it with deep interest, particularly this last meeting in Tokyo, which was virtually at the behest of India, and which our foreign minister went and attended. There's some very interesting writings in the media of late on the Quad, and each of them getting better all the time. One of them, for example, talks about the concept of Quad Plus. Now, Quad is about 4 countries at the moment which seem to be having absolutely similar ideas, or broadly similar ideas, convergence of the security interests. But there are other countries. For example, there is Vietnam, and there is France. And a lot of people say that what is France's interest in this area? But France happens to be a maritime power also. And France's interest in the Indian Ocean continue. You remember, France has got the Reunion Island and places like that. So I'm sure given invitations, given some kind of an interest, there are more countries who are going to join up. And this is going to be a psychological dampener for China. You see, what is emerging as a potential Cold War, kind of a dispensation is clear that China has North Korea, Pakistan, maybe Turkey, Iran. This is the kind of thing which is emerging at the moment. I mean, it's still in the imagination stage. But here you have far more responsible countries, democratic countries which are emerging here, the United States, Japan, Australia, India. And I look at potentials like Vietnam, France, and possibly some more countries from within the ASEAN region itself. So it can't be limited to just 4 nations. Quad can't be just limited to 4 nations. The scope of Quad, as you mentioned, Malabar happens to be an exercise actually independent of the Quad. But it's virtually now related to it because the 4 nations of the Quad are now participating in Malabar. What we need perhaps is the potential of looking at some kind of a command and control, some kind of a secretarial organization coming up, for example, in a place like Port Blair. Now, that is again huge strategic messaging because we all understand what the Malacca syndrome is all about. After all, the whole of Indo-Pacific is actually, the concept of the Indo-Pacific is based on the Malacca syndrome itself. Will that be very, very, should we say, would that be sending some very, very acidic signals to China? I can't be certain about that. But this is the direction in which we should be looking. We should also be looking more for, I know that Quad is all about the maritime, but we should also be looking at some kind of a effort towards command post exercises at the land level, a political wargaming and things of that, which can bring a greater geopolitical understanding to the levels, to jointly to the political and the military and the diplomatic levels simultaneously. All this is about taking Quad forward progressively. No one is looking at Quad suddenly jumping into a war fighting kind of a mode, but everything actually coming out from trust, from addition of technology, bringing in more nations together and projecting a very, very clear message to China.
Right. I want to get in Mr. Seth again at this point here, and we'll go back to where William, what William said. And what I want to ask you, sir, is we have a specific shopping list which is ready, which we want to procure or perhaps co-develop going forward. Now, what is the sense that you have in terms of the modalities of how this will be done? Will it be through, G2G deals, or do we see more joint ventures going forward? How does the Indian industry, Mr. Seth, see the kind of opportunities that lie ahead?
I think the issue is what you rightly says. Let's say this FDI norm is in place, even if many of the US company, which was earlier, or any other foreign OEMs who were thinking about the control on the joint venture, now with 74% being in place, I think there will be many Indian companies who will be happy to partner with many of those US enterprise. They're retaining the stake control, which is okay, as long as the technology transfer happens under their control with this joint venture. 2 things: Indian OEMs are ready to invest into it because they feel the government of India will give long-term contracts. And therefore, because as you're aware, once a item is in service, it goes for many years to come, and it requires after-sale service and maintenance over the years. Once this technology transfer happens in this joint venture, the so-called indigenization happens, which reduces the overall long-term cost of the production, leading to supply chain, which is very good. It is a win-win for both. This current new defense policy should bring that comfort to many US organizations to partner with Indian firms. And I'm sure many companies, including like us, who will be very happy to partner and bring technology to the country to support Indian government's long-term aspirations to have local indigenization and also re-exports many of the things. It's not only about labor arbitrage, it's also about reducing the cost of production, making it simpler for many other countries to afford. So I think we look forward to this relationship between the US companies and Indian organization for joint venture. Need not be G2G, mainly about bringing technology with the help of a joint venture partner with many OEMs ready to participate.
William, you heard, Mr. Seth, as he said, Indian companies are ready to invest. Are US companies ready to invest in India, given the fact that we have, liberalized our FDI regime recently?
Well, I think so. I think the U.S. companies have been investing for many years now. I can speak for Lockheed Martin, and there's many other companies that are very familiar. I mean, our operations down in Hyderabad with Tata are incredibly efficient, both for the C-130J empennage and also the Tata Sikorsky Aerospace Limited. They're producing, high-end helicopter components and S-92 cabins, but then they expanded that and they added the capability of building aircraft engines parts, which are very high tech and very, very high capability that India would like to attract the capability to build aircraft engines. In the C-130J operations, it's not just building empennages. They're building. We're starting to build F-16 wings. We're building composite fuel tanks, and so you start from these small beginnings. This is a decade ago, and they turn into large ventures. And I can say from those two joint ventures, they're feeding down to 240 suppliers, mostly MSMEs, that feed into that. So it's not just the joint venture, it's how is that feeding the defense and aerospace ecosystem. And then we've got another 70 suppliers already that are feeding directly into Lockheed Martin. So what does that now mean going forward? We've got a lot of positive experience. We've got some lessons learned. We have a framework. We have a strong relationship with the government of India and the Ministry of Defense. And now with the increased FDI and a lot of focus on ease of doing business, there's some things we need to improve on. Where the policy might say something such as a corporate tax return comes back, but the process doesn't deliver it. It's the reliability of some of the regulatory and policy into action that then translates to even more confidence for, I think, foreign OEMs and ourselves included, that would say, okay, we know what the business case is, we know what the regulatory reforms that have been put in place, and we know the reliability of both the requirements in India as well as to be able to serve global requirements through partners in India. I think that translates to opportunities that you're going to see many companies want to sign up for. And it's beyond just manufacturing. I think, Mukesh, you spoke to it, that the technology prowess in India is incredible. The engaging startups, more startups in India than anywhere else in the world outside of the US. And we have an India Innovation Growth Program through which we're incubating now hundreds of startups. And so I think there's an ecosystem that's been created that is required for companies to then say, okay, I'm going to take it to the next level. And I think that's where we've come over the last decade. That foundation sets us up to be successful going forward. But again, it translates to the business case, and the business case is built on both an Indian requirement, say for the fighter jets or helicopters under the Strategic Partner Program, and then move it forward because a helicopter can serve both the military as well as a civilian application. And you're going to start to see those convert into large-scale operations and the maintenance, repair, and overhaul required to support it. And that MRO is going to create a hub that can serve not just India, but partner or neighboring nations as well. So I think, we're at an inflection point when you think of it in that context, foundation setting us forward towards, much steeper growth.
Okay, I wanted to ask you a specific question, William, because of the points that you have raised, and it's a very, specific question. If I ask you, and I'll give you two options, and that is, would you go for, collaboration on a project like AMCAR or LCA Mark II, or would you want to see a joint production of one of your 5th generation platforms? What would a company like Lockheed Martin do?
All of the above. No, I mean, seriously, I think we were going from building C-130J empennages and very high-end aerospace components really next door, and Boeing has operations nearby in Hyderabad, and wanting to take it to the next level for the the MRFA requirement and the NUH requirement now that that capability is there. But that's a path towards 5th gen fighter and working that in parallel. There's a long history of US and India working together on the LCA, with the engines from General Electric. And so I think, there's that integration. I wanted to make that point earlier in a way, maybe this is the time to do it. It's not just the platforms, it's those tier one partners, I won't call them suppliers, that bring the systems, whether it's the radars, the engines, and the missile systems, that need to be part of that integrated package, because that's what's going to make the 5th gen fighter most capable, as well as the physical platform itself.
Right. Okay. I think we have overshot our time as far as this panel discussion is concerned. Let's get in some questions now. And let me first take a question from Nalin Kohli, CII is a national chairman on startups, and he is asking, can we look forward to US-India cooperation between SMEs and startups by the way of joint ventures and technology transfer? So, if either William or Mr. Bhargav or Mr. Seth, would you, if one of you can give an answer to this question?
Okay, I would just like to, before answering that question, I just wanted to add something to what General Hasnain has said. With regard to, from my Navy background, I can very confidently say that the first tri-service command was set up in Port Blair, Andaman and Nicobar Command. It was not out of the blue. It was well thought out because we have realized the significance of Malacca Strait. One is fully aware about the string of pearls theory which the Chinese follow, the PLA Navy follows for the oil and the trade that goes through the Indian Ocean regions. They've been following their BRI initiative with the ports in Djibouti and Hanban-Tota, and also the nuclear submarines, PLA Navy's nuclear submarines operating in the Indian Ocean region to protect the trade. I'm a submariner myself, and I can tell you, and Bill would agree with me, nuclear submarines are instruments of sea denial and not sea control. The Chinese Navy's submarines operating in Indian Ocean region is to control that, not to protect that trade. To the Quad Plus, what General Hasnain mentioned, I would like to add 2 more countries, that is Philippines and Taiwan. And I think now with Taiwan under the One China policy of Mr. Xi is already being kept out of discussion by the Chinese, I think it is in the Quad Plus, we need to add that. Now, as far as the opportunities for the MSME, the question that has been asked is, we need to look at what are the potential deals that are on the table today and between the India and US companies, and how that would create a flow down effect for the MSMEs. We have the 110 fighter aircraft, the MMRCA 2.0. We have the 6 MRTT for $2 billion, 57 naval fighters, 123 NMRH, 111 NUH, 22 Sea Guardian drones, and of course the NASAMS missile, 10 additional P8I, and of course the 13 naval guns. All these programs, there are potential opportunities for Indian and US companies to work together. And whether it happens through a joint venture, because joint venture, I fully agree with what Bill says, joint venture is not something which is opened up for a particular project. It has a life expectancy and it is based on a business case. So unless the 2 companies have a business case that will last for a time, that a joint venture makes it viable, you cannot form a joint venture. But joint venture is the top level of collaboration. You have 4 or 5 levels of collaboration, and we can start from the lowermost rather than starting from the top. So the joint venture is a very loosely ended terms. In Indian context, it's a company that gets incorporated and get registered under the registrar of companies. Below that, you have teaming agreements, you have project-based MOU, you have memorandum of understanding, you have many other ways of collaboration. So we should identify something which is a low-hanging fruit between the Indian and I think we can ask Avnish, you can ask somebody to mute his mic. I think there's some voice coming. So we need to look at these low-hanging fruit for the collaboration between the India and US companies. And while it is good for looking for something like Bill very rightly mentioned about the startups, India is number 3 globally in the number of startups. But I would say, other than Israel, we will be number 2 as far as the technology competence and the knowledge that is there. I've been handling a number of startups from my IIT alumni point of view, as well as from my company point of view. And I can tell you, on the industry 4.0, on the AI, on the ML, on the IoT, the kind of products that are available in India, probably the world, the US companies would give their right hand to get hold of those products. And that is an opportunity, which is an untapped opportunity of collaboration and bringing the startups into the ecosystem, not just for the Indian defense, but also for the US defense. And why can't we have a collaboration between the tier 2 and tier 3 and tier 1s of the US companies with the Indian MSMEs and the startups? And that is something which is, I think, a huge potential. Maybe Bill may like to add to that. We also need to look at collaborative R&D in Indian private sector, where the funding can be decided on a case-to-case basis, whether it should be done by Indian MOD or the DoD of US, because the products that would come out would have application on both sides. So this is another area where not just the startups, but the R&D into the private sector should be another area which we need to look at. There is one area which I have not mentioned it. In the DAP 2020, there is one chapter, one section that has been made out on special materials for defense. India, though we are trying to move up the value chain and go from 35, 40 to 70% indigenous content, but we'll fall flat on our face if we don't have indigenous capability on building the raw material and special material required for defense in India. And that is one area. And I'm very sure it does not come under the restricted regime for the US companies. Bill may like to clarify that, which could be another area of collaboration that we can look at between India and US companies. So there are special materials, there are startups, there are AI, ML, IoT, Industry 4.0 opportunities. And of course, there is the frugal manufacturing and the lean manufacturing, which Indian companies have really gained a predominant pace. These are the values that Indian industry can bring to the table when they talk about collaborating with the US companies. And this would be, I think, immensely beneficial to the US companies. Either they're looking at only for the Indian market, but also for the US market and the third world market, as I mentioned, for the export.
Right. I hope our startups and MSMEs who have logged in, they have taken notes on what was said just now. Fairly,
I give free consultancy, Ritu, to the MSMEs,
okay. In fact,
to the CII forum.
Right. Okay. There is one specific query, and again, we already are getting questions on taking forward potential joint ventures. Mr. Arunachalam of High Energy Batteries, he's asking that, is there any industry body based in US whom, Indian MSMEs or startups or companies can approach to take forward opportunities or joint opportunities in co-production or, and co-development? That's a query coming in from Mr. Arunachalam. William, would you want to take that?
I think, and I can't quote it specifically, but having worked, the DoD in the U.S. had started a program connecting into startups in the Silicon Valley area, and so there's a kind of an intersection point there if we're talking about startups in the defense domain. But there's, I think, an adjacency, and it's really integral with defense, and that is the space domain. My experience over the last few years is there's so many startups coming up in the space domain, and what's really unique about that is you can develop capabilities very much in the commercial domain, and they can translate into defense. And so there's a rapid innovation that's happening right now in space that I think the startups are actually probably one of the biggest incubators and impetus for that. So I would say those two areas. I could come back to you, to identify exactly where. I did want to pick up on an earlier comment, though. As Mukesh, you were speaking, the materials aspect of it. I think that's a tremendous opportunity for lots of companies of different sizes and types, because when we talk materials, it's both the procurement, it's the extraction of the raw material, it's the processing, it's the material testing to aerospace and defense standards. I really believe that ties into the DTTI we talked about earlier, because at the end of the day, you need to be able to produce materials to military and commercial standards for aerospace and defense. And that's a multi-year journey. And generally countries invest in that through consortiums. It's not necessarily any one company that would have the ability, in terms of both the demand to be able to make a business case around it. And so I think there's a real opportunity there. And then the comment earlier I didn't get a chance to respond to, but it ties into the startups and it relates to this question you just posed. There really is a startup to startup connection. We're working with some startups through the India Innovation Growth Program in India. We'd love to be able to connect, as we already do, our tier 1, tier 2 suppliers. When we look at, building a platform in India to meet a requirement, it's not just, it's multi-tiers of suppliers that need to make those same connections. And so in a way, we need to be a broker, we need to be a bridge as companies to connect the Indian startups, the Indian MSMEs with their counterparts in the US. And we're very much in a position to do that. And all of us, the OEMs, large OEMs like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, we have venture organizations that are really looking for those startups and trying to make those connections. And so I think, again, there's multiple avenues for us to be able to bring the startups under the tent, if you will, whether it's from a government to government or B2B basis.
We just completed an hour of discussing different aspects of India-US defense related ties. Some very interesting points being made, starting with Lieutenant General Hassain, who said that how geopolitical events pushing both these countries of India and US to change gears as far as their strategic partnership is concerned. We have also had responses on how the stage is set for co-development and core production of critical defense ecosystem, how supply chain related strengths of India can be leveraged by these possible joint ventures going forward, and how Indian OEMs as well as US companies are perhaps ready to invest into the critical technology related areas related to defense. We have had a very interesting set of comments coming in, but like all good things, this also has to come to an end. I am, I'm now asking Avnish to take over and propose the vote of thanks. Avnish, over to you.
Thank you, Ritu, and thank you for conducting the discussion so well. It was a joy to hear you taking on the questions and moderating the discussion. And thank you for bringing out the right geopolitical aspects as well as the industry aspects from our speakers. So indeed, thank you so much for that. I'll be very short in this. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Commodore Bhargava, and thank you, Mr. Seth, for coming on our platform again. It's again a great pleasure to have you on board, and for your views for our participants as well. Just to inform everyone, we have close to 130 participants joining us for this session, and now also we have more than 100 right now. So thank you so much. And this is not the only US event that we're going to do in the next, after the elections, in the next few months. We are going to have a dedicated event also with both the MODs also involved, which we're going to do on our CII platform. So I invite everyone on this session to join us for that particular event as well. I will put my email ID across in the chat box, and you can get in touch with me to take it forward. So SIDM will take this forward, at least for the US. Will be very active with Lockheed, will be very active with other companies also, will be very active. And thank you so much again for all panelists, and thank you especially to Ritu for carrying on this discussion. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Ritu.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you. My pleasure.